Hello and welcome to Landon Live. Today I have with me Steve Petra. Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Fantastic. All right, we've got some people on with us. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Steve, how did you become a ventriloquist?
There was sort of a series. It was the last thing in the series.
Mhm.
I was a musician, and then that sort of led me into getting interested in other art forms. Puppetry being the one that I became obsessed with, and I became a professional puppeteer. And then, in order to bring about a change in the show that I was presenting, that would benefit the audience,
Mhm.
I say to be more contemporary and interactive. My wife suggested I learn ventriloquism, which she was already interested in, and then I started pursuing that. And when I got into that, added some magic to it. I still had the music and the puppetry background, and now all the gears were turning for me.
Wow. Wow, that's truly neat. So did you have music in your act when you had started, or was music something that you added later on?
No, I always had music in the act because I'm a
Mhm.
musician. I write the music for the
Sure.
performances. Every show ends in a finale song that the whole entire audience participates in. So I sort of run it like it's like a concert. My DNA is still musician, so I'm
Yeah,
always thinking in as that context of music and timing and
sure.
tempo, and the audience being to respond in a way that like they would to a musical event.
Sure. So today we're going to talk about creativity in puppet building. And Steve, you have some things with you you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, when you asked me about doing this, I said,
Mhm.
well, Landon is he's a performer, he's a ventriloquist, but I see that you've really been building up your puppet business, your puppet building business, and I see, I've been in the dealer's room a number of times because I've often been running the Axtell booth, and I
Yes,
just see that your work really developed, and you were very centered on what the customers wanted, and I and that really resonated with me because I'm not a great puppet builder. The stuff that I build is really kind of abstract, but I found there's a mode of operation I sort of adhere to. It's like
sure.
I've got it's like Frank Zappa describes his guitar solos as, well, he's got a working knowledge of the instrument, mechanical working knowledge, and he's got an imagination. Those two things come together and make this application that he can be creative with
Sure.
what he's got. And that's how I looked at it. Every time I learned something about puppet building, I would do something with it. And that led, one thing always led to another. I'll give you a couple of examples because
Yeah.
it's really very much part of my creative process
Hmm.
as well. And it's something I haven't been able to talk about before. A friend of mine, I was in the Puppet Guild of Long Island. These were puppeteers. We're doing hand puppets. There was no ventriloquism. I wasn't a ventriloquist yet.
Right.
But someone gave up. One of the members came from New Jersey and gave a class on working with foam. The kind of foam
Okay.
that we use to build puppets. Show how to
Sure.
glue the seams and basic things. And I made something very simple like this.
Hmm.
And I had this like drop down mouth
Yeah.
and so I just all I had to do was like make a few darts
Yeah.
and glue that effectively and then cut a shape in it, stick a nose on, and everything I do has eyebrows.
Hmm.
And that led me into um, maybe there's something I can do that I can actually use, and it wouldn't
Sure.
have to be that demanding. So one of the first puppets I made was this is Louis the Germ, and he had a neck and he was in a bucket.
Oh, he's great.
He has this like weighted tongue, and
Oh, that's
what this what
great.
this puppet is. This is what I made in this class. The mouth plate.
Okay.
This is actually this base part was what I made in this class. So then what I would do is I can draw a little bit, but I
Mhm.
didn't have a computer at the time. So what I'd have to do is draw my promos. I don't know if you can see. Let's see if I can get that. There you go. The
Oh,
Professor
yeah, that's
Green.
great.
And you can see Louis the Germ down there. I would draw the picture. Then I say, how do I make that? This is another one I built for that show. This is Orange Robot, but he's buried in a trunk some back there.
Yes.
So I just took this thing. I said, boy, if I cut pieces, I can make it look like the drawing. and then and it's already got a moving mouth. So I took the stuff that was there. I'm very lazy,
Yeah.
and I made a character out of it that I used and I performed with, and that was like the first thing I made. I said, well, I have an eye that I can see. Is this going to read to the audience?
Sure.
So, I'm not a great artist, but I can.
So that's a foam structure, and then you built onto that, and you painted it.
Yeah, I just spray painted. I do not
That's
have
great.
the skills to cover anything with cloth.
No, but that's how some of the, you know what it reminds me of are the Muppets when they have like fruit come on Sesame Street. They have
Well,
like fruit characters or vegetables. They have that they'll either vacuum form foam or they'll just paint it, and it's got
yeah,
that aesthetic to it, which is really neat.
big inspiration for me because, in fact, one of the things that I really like to talk because I kind of feel like we're here to help people with their creative process.
Sure.
We can talk about ventriloquism history and stuff, but people are I think a lot of performers would like to ramp up their creative process a bit,
Yeah.
and it's something I kind of do naturally. One first thing I do is that started me was inspiration, and that was from a couple of books of Muppets and Men. Hard to get this thing, but this became my textbook of what I was going to be doing with my life. And there's exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Food, right? And to follow through on that, I became obsessed with puppetry, and I started, trying to find things that people made and from catalogs. I had just almost found out about Axtell at that time, but I was taking every book I could out of the library, and this is important for creative process to become informed with what the landscape is of that art form. And the library is a perfect place because I'm like self-directed learner. Libraries are like where I'd rather be than anywhere else. Sure. And I found this book in my library, Making Puppets Come Alive by Carol Fijan.
Okay.
And after taking every other book in the library out, I found another book with her name on it called Directing Puppet Theater.
Oh, wow.
And then I found that she lived about 20 miles from me.
Oh.
On Long Island. I called her up. At the time she was 75 years old, and I kind of persuaded her to let me join her puppet class, which was in her house up in Great Neck, New York. And that became a relationship that changed my life.
Wow.
What she worked with were what she taught me, and this is
Was it a performing or was it a building class?
It was performing, but it wasn't performing with Muppet kind of puppets. She says, you have to learn puppetry before you're going to do that well, because you're working with a mouth. You've got all these elements that you're not in complete control of. And she had us work with hand puppets, like a glove puppet.
Sure.
But she started us and made us work with puppets like this. This is called a Carol Fijan work puppet. In her book, she shows what these are. There are no features. They're made from scraps that she had. And you'd pick one of these up. She'd give you a card that had written on it what the puppet was going to be doing, but you weren't allowed to say anything. So the other people in the class had to know what was on the card by what you did. So that's where I learned about movement that has meaning. Meaning, she called it meaningful movement, and that's where I learned what balance is. That you can impart weight and attitude. And just with the simplest of puppets, I ended up using this. Fast forward 20 years later, I brought this out at a lecture for Cadabra, and I did a bit with it. I called him Eugene, and it was the most popular thing in my lecture.
Wow.
And that made me think, gosh, that's my roots. I really learned so much by understanding movement, puppetry, and theater from what she taught me, just with those. That this is what I used before I was puppeteer. This was one of our characters. This was Gruntberger the caveman, and he's a lot more. See, this is really built inside, so it's really very articulated. So I can almost get an elbow out of it, and the head is made to read from a distance. And with a puppet like this, you also have a waist. So there's not just back of it. Like you've got this bending down, you've got lifting, you've got all this kind of meaningful movement that you can impart to it.
Now I'm curious, do you have a character like that right now in your show? And do you
Funny
open
you
with it, or
said.
where do you have it in your show?
We didn't prepare this. He's right here. Because of the success of that in the lecture, in my event lecture, I also brought Eugene out.
Uh-huh.
And this is Eric the Sheep. Eric the Sheep is now one of the biggest, most popular bits I do.
Wow.
I usually change cast every year when I do a new library show. Eric
Uh-huh.
has been in at least three of every other year I put Eric back in.
So he
He's
needs a
Eric.
pay raise, is what you're saying.
Yeah, he does. And he has all those qualities. It was a folk Manus
Wow.
puppet. And
Okay.
go back to the building thing, to be
Mhm.
inspired, I made modifications to it.
Yeah.
I redid the inside of it so I can move the arms the way I wanted to get the range of expression.
Mhm.
Made this bottom part of the costume.
That's great.
I added the eyes to it, and there's a rigid piece of pipe so that the neck stays, so wherever he looks, and he doesn't speak, and I've got a 9-minute routine with him,
Wow.
and I don't have to memorize any dialogue in my lips now, but it's just so much fun to do it.
Sure.
And it's really, this is like, if you're involved in another art form, if you're a
Mhm.
musician, a painter, my advice to people who feel they want to be more creative is to break down those barriers and let those other experiences in your life, even if they're not art forms, if you're a warehouse manager, or let those experiences seep into your creative process,
Sure.
because creativity is really it's a human quality that is not just artistic. It's a problem solving mechanism
Sure.
that we possess. And to keep that out and just think, well, I'm going to sit and, well, some people can do this. They sit there, I'm going to write a script, I'm going to outline my character,
Mhm.
I'm going to set up the jokes. My brain doesn't work that way. So I'm kind of like the deviator. But people like Mark Wade and Tom Crowell and so many other people in the event community are very welcoming to me and my process.
Sure.
So it's really been positive at every turn, interacting with the event community and growing as a better
Right.
event. I went to see Jay Johnson's show, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and I just saw the impact
Phenomenal show. Yeah.
that level of skill and understanding and artistry in what he does. And I realized, this is serious. I've got to get all these elements under control. I've got to, my lip control has got to be better, and all those substitutions, and I really, really worked on all of that stuff. Meanwhile, all these gears are still spinning.
Mhm.
So it
Well,
just
it's
expanded my flexibility and my artistic palette on stage.
sure. Well, what's interesting is you bring up being creative by looking at other outlets that of your life. And there was a guy at convention that was in the adult open mic, and his whole bit revolved around he was a welder. So he had this welding mask, and he brought it out, and it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And the ventriloquist aspect was like a side to that. Like that was just like extra. So it's really neat to see that. I'm curious, where is the sheep character in your show? Because having something that doesn't talk amongst characters that do must be very captivating. It must be able to.
Yeah, I bring it. He's usually either this. I usually use talking about my library shows now, not my school shows. I usually use 4 characters because
Okay.
I need to set up that cast, and I need to market the show 9 months before I'm ready to perform it.
Mhm.
So I establish a cast, and then I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with them. I know it's ass backwards from what everybody teaches, but
Mhm.
I feel I can do that. I get away with it, and
Sure.
it's I kind of swing with that kind of intensity where I have
Mhm.
put upon me. I have to do it. I have to come up with something, and so Eric is usually like the second or the third. He's never the first. The first is always my alpha character, which continues commenting throughout the show, and then we do a finale with the alpha.
Okay.
So Eric is usually the second or the third character.
Wow.
So I usually bring him out with an apology. He tries to fit himself in, like he's got this. This is a superhero show that I
Uh-huh.
and it stays on my roster. It was a theme a couple of years ago. Good themes like this stay on the roster because
Sure.
I work not just summer reading. Then the library bookings come throughout the year when they have different kinds of themes and events they
Mhm.
want to do. I bring in the superhero show, or any of the other, like I think I got like 8 or 10 on there.
Mhm.
But so he was Eric. His first appearance was Eric the Shoveling Sheep, because it was a construction show. Speaking of the guy with the
Okay,
welding,
great. Yeah.
and like he had this show, and he had this like little he has like voiceovers go Eric the Shoveling Sheep in 4-part harmony every time he pushes a button. I work him out of a box. He sits in a box with his name on it, and that's his world. As long as he's in that box, he feels he has control over everything.
Wow. So I'm curious, do you notice a shift or a maybe difference in the way your audience is participating in the show or is watching you when you bring out that element? I mean, or has it been kind of the same because of the way you structure your show?
No, it's funny you should bring that up, because I wasn't particularly focusing on that, but I did notice it.
Okay.
Um, it's really a different part of the show, and there's a book called um, Laugh and Learn,
Hmm.
and it's written by someone's comedian, but it's about brain chemistry and human development,
Okay.
and it's about how when in order to keep people's attention, we're wired to pay attention when something changes. That's
Okay.
why I change so much stuff, because I've got with the library show, you have 3 years old to adult, and I want the whole family to be enjoying the show. So things
Hmm.
have to change, and when you have something that changes to that degree, where you're bringing out a box, and then this thing isn't going to talk, it's going to come out, it's going to be adversarial right from almost from the beginning, complaining about his introduction not being right. It becomes a change. Like they related this kind of brain reaction to like cavemen, and
Hmm.
there'd be smoke in the distance from a volcano. Whatever you're doing, you stop doing, you'll look at that smoke.
Okay.
And so he's like a little smoke from the volcano coming out. Things are
Wow.
changing now you have their attention, but you have to keep it. So your routine, this is an important part of the creative process, is that the routine not only continues, but it develops.
Okay.
And that I mentioned in some of my DVDs where I'm doing things where repetition is fine, but you have to things have to increase in intensity.
Sure.
And it's important. It's a theatrical
Hmm.
development.
Could you give us an example of how your show changes? Maybe a summer show where it's themed and geared toward some topic changes throughout the span that you perform it, and you're able to hone the material and the characters. And do they always, I mean, do you end up keeping the same cast throughout that show, or do you find that something might not work and toss it to the side?
Yeah. With one exception, I've kept the cast.
Okay.
There was one time I I had laryngitis, and I was barely able to get through the show, and I had lost the segment of my vocal ability that did one specific character.
Hmm.
So I left it out, and the show went smoother. So in
Wow.
subsequent performances of that show, I didn't
Hmm.
do that character. I
Okay.
didn't need the time, because I do almost over an hour of performance, because I now do up to 15 minutes of warm up material.
Hmm.
As people are, I'm always adjusting to the culture of the audience. People don't
Okay.
come in on time, so as people are coming in, instead of starting the show and then I feel like they're catching up or they miss something,
Hmm.
now there's a barrier for them to enjoy
Wow.
the show. Instead of that, I have like 5, 6 different warm up things that are very engaging, establish my personality, establish my relationship with the audience, gets me to
Mhm.
read them well.
Wow.
And by the time we start the show, it's 15 minutes after I started, and pretty much everybody is there. And now they're all prepared. I've got them in the roller coaster. I've got them their seat belts on, and we're
Mm.
ready to start hitting the dives.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm curious, you are an Axtell power user.
Yes, I am.
So when do you determine that, oh, I want to use this character from Axtell Expressions, or I'll just build this? What is
All right,
your
there's a method to that. There's a
the
method
method
to that.
behind it?
Good questions, by the way. Uh,
Thank you.
because I tend to want to build things for my school shows,
Okay.
not my library shows. There's a reason to that, because I'm supported by arts and education funding for New York State, where I work. 90% of my work, 80% of my work is New York State. And if you're not only performing, but writing and writing music, but building what you make, you have more artist cred.
Huh. Okay.
So if you think about it in that way, I'm really being hired as arts and education. That's the label under which I'm brought into the school. And
Sure.
in the eyes of the people handling the funding, that's my purpose, is arts and education. Then it's my job to make it funny and pertinent to curriculum.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
here's just an aside.
Yeah.
One of the things, speaking of stuff I build, the first school show that I built for myself, I had no idea what I was doing. It was my first school ventriloquist show. And 2000, what year is it now? 2020?
2020, yeah.
20 years I've been doing this show.
Wow.
And that was all I had to sell it, as I drew these pictures. And then I had to build everything I drew. But one of the concepts I thought, but remember, I'm coming from puppet theater and not from.
Sure.
So my creative process is not as linear as the ventriloquist would be, where you sit down, you write your script, you develop my creative process is more like building a world.
Sure. More hands-on and more.
Right. If you go to like a Puppeteers of America festival, people are building stuff they use. They're also the building of it.
It's a lot of set pieces and extra things that help move the act on.
Yeah, it's artistically, it's a wider palette than traditional vent. And that's not a criticism. I'm just observing, worlds that I've walked through. And I said, well, what can I bring from this world into where I'm going? And like for that show, this is just the stomach, but it's like scenery that comes alive as part of the show. And none of this is elaborately built. He's just got a mouth out like that, and he's giving me a hard time. And
it's great.
And the lungs are built the same way. They're on a piece of foam board, and I can put my hand behind them and work both the mouths. And there's nothing elaborate in any of this, but it really reads to the back of the audience. And at one point we show what the inside of the lung is like.
Oh wow!
So everything is based on content with schools. Content drives the humor. It drives what I'm going to do, what I'm going to build. How I'm going to present it, what the participants are going to be doing on stage. Everything has to be built on content. With a library show now I need Axtell, because you can see my stuff is very abstract. But what Steve does is something I do not have the skill set to do.
Right.
And I need to assemble a cast. And now I'm dealing with a younger demographic, because it goes down to about 3 years old, with up to like 5th grade and then adults. So I'm looking to assemble a cast, and that's how I've accumulated so many Axtell puppets. Every year I have to do a new library show with a new theme. I want 4 characters, because there are a lot of magicians vying for that summer library work, and some of them are really, really talented and imaginative, and I want to be the puppet guy. I want to be the guy that they look to above anybody else in my market to be puppet, and I want it to be, and it's got to be funny. So Axtell, I look at what he's got, what's new, and I'm almost impulsive, like getting stuff, but I always use it. And every time I use something, I learn something about how the puppet works, what its limitations are, what it does really well, how well is it, and again, it's always going back to that hand puppet. What does it do really well that the audience understands? And what are its limitations? Steer away from the limitations, exploit its assets, and make it something that's memorable within a segment of the show.
One thing I love about the Axtell characters is that they're so colorful and can be seen so well from a distance.
Yeah,
And they're cartoons and they have this that they just resonate with kids so well.
yeah, they do. I mean, it's easy for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience to pick up an Axel puppet and come out and get a good reaction.
Mhm.
But then it's upon them to develop the skill set
Right.
so that they're really not just coming out and doing the least they can do, but really learning.
Sure.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Well, I remember a few years back you showed up at the convention and everybody was talking about your performance and it was it was really extraordinary. And now you're really seem from what I can see you're devoting yourself to becoming a better and better builder and getting better results. More
Mhm.
people are using your stuff. How did that come about? Or was that
Well, it's
always there?
I've always had a love for art, but I've never taken a formal art class.
Mhm.
So I would sketch in my notebook during class and things like that. And my friend Langston had sent me some patterns. He said, "You should try puppet building. I think you'd like it." I got the patterns, started making some crude puppets as everyone starts off doing. And usually when you build puppets, for some reason they start where they're bigger. I just don't know why, and then you have to scale down. And I
Yeah.
just started posting things and I get feedback from followers on Facebook and just evolving my own style. And I think I've now gotten to the point as a builder where I can, all of my puppets that I build for myself and for other people don't fit into kind of a cookie cutter mold. So you can't tell if I built it or not, but it looks professionally built. And that's the goal for
Yeah.
what I do. And then I also, I've actually been cutting my building back and been focusing more on shows, but I'll build the occasional thing for someone. And of course, I always have a table at the annual Vent Haven convention. So that's always fun where I get to build a plethora of different characters to offer to the public.
So you have time set aside before a convention where you're going to build up enough product to bring with you.
Sure, yes. Yeah.
That's great. And all you're devoting yourself to getting more stage time, but all that stage time informs your puppet building in a way
It
that
does.
nothing else could.
It does. I was doing an interview with a friend Jeff Goltz, and he was saying that he's also a puppet builder, and he wanted his character to be as good as the material. So he kept rebuilding the puppet until he got it to where he felt confident with it on stage in relation to the material that he had developed and honed. It's really a neat thing. I have this character over here. I haven't done anything with yet. I had this idea my senior year of high school that I do a puppeteering aspect before I did my show, and I'd have these birds pop out, and it's green, of course, so you can barely see it in front of the green screen, but it's got all these different aspects to it, and it's a rod puppet, so it can
Oh,
be
cool.
puppeteered from a rod, and so behind stage, and then it would be a singing bird, and then I have two other birds that would be its background singers,
Oh,
its
great.
backup
See,
singers, and
that's you really have to open yourself for different ways of presenting um, the art form. It's funny that you brought. One of the things when I started building, I was always building with foam because that's what I learned. I learned one way
Mhm.
to do stuff, and then I exploited. So I
Yeah.
learned how to make a mouth mechanism from a pattern for a flower puppet that I never built. And I
Mhm.
built like 17 different characters, just kept scaling down. How small can I make it? I made this character called Captain Littlehead. He's got its head the size of a lemon and a normal sized body, but big wide shoulders.
Oh, that's great.
And so there's a tiniest version of that same, and this is the same thing. And it's like a hybrid. It's got a how you doing there? Okay, it's got a rod,
Yeah.
but it's a Muppet style looking puppet, in the way it's designed. It's
But
got
another thing
eyebrows.
that I noticed just from when you introduce the character is that it doesn't have a definitive lip or anything, so you don't even know if it's gonna talk. And then it
No,
opens up
yeah,
this
I know.
wide mouth, and it's just a great another aspect in the comedy of the routine.
And I really thought, oh, should I put a tongue in it? Should be red. I said, no, it should just be black. He's a mummy. He's like dead inside.
Right. Yeah.
So you're making artistic, creative decisions the whole time with little nuances. And then one thing I do like is because as a puppeteer, I was trained to use the stage, which
Sure.
which was a proscenium. but now
Mhm.
you're proceeding to stage wherever you are, so I like mobility in at least a few characters, at least
Mhm.
one in every show, and so I just have this gauze draped down, and so he's a mummy head. His rest of his body turned to dust, and I can work him, and you can't see that I'm holding it, and I've got like maybe a dozen puppets that I've modified, Axtell puppets that I've
Sure.
modified that I can have mobility with.
Hmm.
Not that I need to be wandering all over the stage. You want to block it like you would, theatrically.
Sure. Sure, but you
But
make every kid in the audience feel like they've got a front row seat.
yeah, and then you know what? There's the audience has something to contribute to your
Hmm.
show. You're not. They're not passive. When I was doing a puppet show on a stage, we felt it was my wife and I felt it was because she used to perform with me. Felt it was this is a passive audience experience, but more and
Hmm.
more things needed to be interactive. People were asking for interactive stuff in schools and so on. And now the audience, what they how they respond and how they respond as a group and uh, can flavor the performance in a way that's unique for them.
Wow.
Because now you're getting down into the weeds of performance, but this is what makes it an exceptional experience for them.
So you're used to breaking the fourth wall when you perform.
Well, I meant not in the puppet stage, so there is no fourth
Hmm.
wall
Right. Okay.
because they're not a passive audience anymore. Now they're
Mhm.
part of it. That whole 15 minute of warm up thing
Right.
is extensive, and it serves several purposes. And one of those warm ups is not most of them is magic, but one of them is just this little guy. I have a Stewie the Lemon, and it took me years to develop each line. Just
Uh-huh.
over the course of years, I added a line until he's got like 4 minutes that are killer,
Wow.
and then and it's just a little thing, so they're really watching my mouth because there's no big puppet, and then they
Hmm.
realize, all right, this is really, this is good. This
Wow.
quality entertainment for kids, because they
Sure.
see a lot of stuff that's not, you
Hmm.
know, and it's important. It takes a lot of work and a lot of imagination to to uh, to exceed their expectations.
So have you ever built a set piece for a character that you thought would work and then it flopped?
Uh, Quite a few.
Hmm. Can you give an example?
Uh, I made things too complicated. Was usually what happened.
Okay.
I had a I let's see. There was one. I had this guy Itchy Louie, and he was this purple, it's just fur character. Some guy made he had this, his eyelids could close. There was a little
Hmm.
mechanism inside. That's why when I got the thing in the mail, it smelled like smoke.
Oh
But
man.
but I arranged it so like he could scratch himself. I wired the arm so he could scratch because he was itchy.
Right.
And uh, I created a set piece where I had Itchy Louie on one side. I had another stand next to it with a bag, and inside the bag, Itchy's teeth ran away. And in the bag were his teeth that were on another rod mechanism.
Oh man.
And I had this thing where they were going to bring him and his teeth back together. His teeth ran away because he was brushing with tuna fish toothpaste or something. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
So so it became this complicated thing for me to execute like physically.
Right.
And then I had a foot pedal that I could turn on the wedding music because we brought them back together. And he'd stick his head in the bag, and I'd had these other
Right.
set of teeth that would Velcro into his mouth,
Oh wow.
and it was like there's times you got to scale it back,
Yeah. Wow. I love
and
that.
that's not the only time that happens to me less and less.
Really. Yeah.
I become in the writing process, I start editing while I'm writing
Hmm.
and simplifying things, and
So when you have an idea for a character or you see a character that you want to purchase, do you, I mean, is it like you just buy it or do you think, oh, yeah, I could use this because I could write, you write a few lines and you say, oh, yeah, I could totally see that in my show? Or does your mind just kind of, yeah, this would be perfect for my show? What's your process behind that?
there's not one process for that.
Okay.
It depends on what I see, what I have to do. Like all the body stuff, the
Mhm.
brain, the digestive system, uh, the lungs, the heart. all of that was driven by what I had to accomplish. So there was specific tasks. You know, I needed a heart, I needed a brain, I needed these body organs. But it goes from that as one thing where I'm building from a concept
Mm-hmm.
specifically, and then finding what kind of character it needs to have for it to be interesting, funny, and still have the content within the routine. And then to the other end of the extreme, I call this create conceptual elasticity. I'll explain what this is. Conceptual elasticity is taking a concept, stretching it almost as far as it can go without breaking it,
Mm-hmm.
and then making it work. An example would be the Axtell came out with the roasted turkey thing.
Yes.
I saw that. I'm going. He knows I'm going to buy 2 of those now, because
Right.
I can't not buy that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but
Mm-hmm.
I want it. It has to be mine.
Hilarious design. Yeah.
Right. So I buy that thing, and I ended. But the show I have to do for that year is a bug show.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's where conceptual elasticity comes in. How can I get that thing into a bug show? And what I did was I got to a certain part, and I said, well, in New York State, there's actually an insect, a state insect for every state.
Okay.
You know, you wouldn't know this unless you did
Yeah,
research.
I didn't know that.
But research is one of my favorite parts of the process, by the way,
Sure.
because I try to find something funny in the research that with a creature or, in this
That's what
case,
Jay Johnson does too, as well. Is that right?
he probably does.
Yeah.
I haven't spoken to him specifically about that, but uh, I mean, Jay Johnson is like I don't. There's nobody I enjoy or appreciate or admire more in this
Mm-hmm.
field. And so I did my research. It's a ladybug, a 9-spotted ladybug, New York State bug. And I'm saying, well, if this was a performance and you needed bugs in a show and you were a producer and you couldn't get a ladybug, what if you hired an actor to dress up like a ladybug? And what initiated this idea is I was walking through
Oh man.
through Target,
Uh-huh.
and so I drift around. I look for stuff, and I'm going through the animal Halloween costume department, and I see a ladybug costume for a dog.
Oh man.
And I go to my wife. I'm going to buy this and put it on the turkey. She says, "Good," because she knows that's how we make a living.
Right. She gets it. Yeah.
Right. Think of something stupid, make it work, get paid.
But it must be neat that your wife is on that same creative wavelength with you.
We used to work together.
Yeah.
And she books the shows. I mean, she's involved in, she's answering the phone. She does the website.
Mm-hmm.
She's very involved in what goes on. But the ladybug thing, it ends up, he wants to take the suit off. He's sweating. He's roasting in the suit. So he's complaining. He's a turkey in a ladybug suit. He keeps comparing turkeys to ladybugs, but his comparisons are actually accurate. They start out as eggs.
Right.
They eat bugs. Hey, turkeys eat bugs. Hey, turkeys start out as eggs. And so yeah. I found this stuff in the research. I blended it together, and I ended up with a great routine.
And I believe it's on YouTube. Is that right? On your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it was. It's also but then I took it and I put it into one of my DVDs as a teaching segment called Facts to Fun.
Is that on which one? Is that Build a Show or Let's Get Visual?
It's on From the Petra Cave.
Okay, cool.
Which is a collection of teaching videos I've done for different websites.
Yeah.
But it's really a wide variety of things that I've discovered. Even after I made the other DVDs, I said, well, I can really add more to this. And my whole point in doing that is, like, I'm not showing off, because, in my mind, I'm always new to this field. But how can I make this something I can teach, that someone can understand it, can absorb it, and then apply it? So to me, it's like teaching is a responsibility, to do it well and get a result from the people that are, paying you for your materials.
Well, and another thing is, it's interesting because you offer so many different ideas and perspectives on this performance art and ways that you can just change your show and make your show more you, essentially. And it's just so neat. I was able to I have the Steve Petra Let's Build a Show. Picked one up at convention. I have the Let's Get Visual. And they're both
Oh,
signed, so
really?
that's, but they're fantastic, and it's really great content. So
So it took me a while before I was willing to give up material
mhm.
through the first one, which was Let's Get Visual. And then from when I first had the idea was to when I actually did it was maybe like 4 or 5 years. And I say, all right, you know what? If I put this on there, people are going to use this material. But when I was at the point where I was good with that, I said, okay, now what? And I went and I looked at all this stuff I did. What am I doing that's consistently successful with an audience?
Okay.
And then I broke it down. I added, because like the Let's Get Visual has the ingredients to visual puppet gumbo. So I
Mm.
break it down. So it's a teaching method. So it's pieces, it's elements of things. And then elements really lend themselves to chemistry. That's where you can take it and make it your own. How much of each thing you dial up or dial down. So each thing is an element. And is, isn't there a periodic table of such a thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Eh,
that's really a method I like to use in teaching, and I feel it allows me to get into the nooks and crannies of the creative process as well.
mhm. Well, and another thing too about the DVDs and everything that you're explaining that you have implemented into your show is that I believe when you start into ventriloquism, you think that it's just you and this dummy next to you, and that's it, and you have to create your content from there. But when you're talking about adding not just a puppet that you can work well with and have chemistry with on stage and have this dialogue back and forth, but props that the puppet has or that you have for the puppet, and then also using the space too is
Yes.
really, I mean, it teaches you how to not just be a ventriloquist or a puppeteer or find how whatever your skill is, but how how to get the most out of that and how to get the most out of your character on stage. And you
Yeah.
you have a great bit where you refer to yourself as the hairy man and with your
Oh,
characters and they pick on you and they go back
yeah.
and forth. It's just
And it develops. It escalates. That's the term. And things have to
yeah.
escalate. I do a thing where I slowly over the course of the show I lose control of the show, and kids love seeing a grown up just really losing his composure. I
Yeah.
do it in measured ways, so I never lose control of the audience, but I
Hmm.
appear to be losing control of the show. And then by the end of the show, the audience appears to have control of the show, which to me, that's an
Wow.
amusement park ride. And if you get on a good amusement park ride, as soon as you get off, what do you want to do? You want to
Get
get
back
back
on.
on.
Yeah.
And to do that, they have to hire you back. You brought up something about props, and I want to relate this to building, because building inspires. Sometimes things are built for a specific purpose.
Yes.
Now, I think maybe on my first DVD, I have the Clint Eastwood, the termite.
Yes, I'm familiar with that character.
All right, now this is a very crudely built puppet, but it really works.
You know what your style of puppet building reminds me of are the of our cartoons, because it's simplistic, but it's very bold in design, and you
Yeah,
can see it well, and it's colorful and it pops. Yeah.
thank you very much. So when I had to build this thing, I said, well, I need something to put him in. He needs a world to live in. And then I have things rigged where the lock falls off when I'm introducing him because I have a magnet I can pull off from the back. But when he
Oh,
comes out,
neat.
he has to eat stuff,
Uh-huh.
and he eats. I give him all the I give him like wooden clips. I give him wooden rule. I give him all this wooden stuff, wooden spoons, and then he eats the chain and gets indigestion. But I created him so that this is all that's here is my thumb.
Oh, wow.
Can you see
Yeah,
that?
I can.
Okay, so this is all. That's it. So everything he eats, he grabs here,
Hmm.
and all the props as he does this, they pass down into and he's here. That's why his jaw is so long. It passes down. So now you're building for a specific performance purpose.
Sure.
It's just another whole creative avenue to explore.
Yeah.
And it's very like prop heavy and almost gimmicky, but it's funny.
Right.
And the thing is, and when you execute, once you make the audience laugh, there's no debate whether you're successful or not,
Oh, of
because
course.
laughs are involuntary. People can clap on their own. They can even give you a
Mhm.
standing ovation being manipulated into doing so. But you can't manipulate someone into laughing. When they
That's
laugh,
very
you win.
that is very true. And another thing that I noticed when you had brought Clint out in his environment is it's another way of introducing a puppet versus just opening a case.
Yeah.
And
And
that's neat too, because you can have that as a prop that's closer downstage or
yeah,
upstage or wherever,
yeah,
and you
I
have
usually sit on a
motivation to
stand.
move around the area.
That's, and you know what? It's part of the stage set that when they come in, they see they'll see they'll see this up on a on a table,
Mhm.
and it's part of the thing that draws interest before you start
Creates
the show.
wonder. Yeah.
He's got a little thing. It says he has a sign on the bottom. It doesn't say his
Mhm.
name. I wait till I introduce it
Right.
because it's a clever name, but as I learned early on in the puppet business, uh, you have to have a lot more than a clever name if you're going to go past an introduction with a character.
Sure.
And
So
go ahead.
I'm curious, what aspects of things that you learned in the puppeteering world, aside from just puppeteering and manipulating a puppet, did you bring into performing as a ventriloquist?
I'll
Is there anything
a
that
lot,
stands out?
a lot of it. There's movement, like I do a routine with the Axtell gorilla with the blue face,
Hmm.
and he's a dopey character, and so he has a rod, he has an elbow rod, and I made the legs so that they stay together because he's got those monkey legs, and they're like they're real like, so I wired them together so he can sit. So then everything is about his movement,
Hmm.
about his posture, his backbone, his head, the angles of his head, the mouth open and close, and the arm.
Huh.
So now I've got that's the vocabulary that he's speaking with
Sure.
visual. So what I how I describe this is manipulation shorthand. When I was working with Carol Fijan and we were working with these puppets, what she did, the way she taught was she said there's arm movements, and that's like you're walking, turning. It's all that is done with your arm.
Hmm.
There's wrist movements, which is everything from the waist, if you're looking up and around. And
Yeah.
there's finger movements. Finger movements can control the head if the head is able to move on a puppet like this, and each of the arms and hands. So you have arm,
Wow.
wrist, and finger movements. They have to
Hmm.
be able to work independently of each other, but also in conjunction with each other in order to create a performance.
Wow.
So with a puppet that most of us are using, like say an Axtell you
Hmm.
or the dragon, what is it called? The gorilla, right? So
Hmm. Yeah, the grill.
the gorilla, so your arm is the spine, and the spine has its own uh, emotional content. It's like attitude. You can tip it forward, and if it's looking at you and the arm goes like this, then it's
Hmm.
like what that means. And so
Right.
but then the wrist is all anything you do with the neck, and the
Hmm.
finger move if the mouth is flexible, you're moving the mouth, and also the wrist and the fingers are moving the angle of the head. So that's one thing I learned from puppetry. It goes directly, and I I
Wow.
I I compared it, and I said, this actually works. I tried it with puppets before I taught it. I said, am I actually doing this, or is this just sound cool? Um, so I can say it at a lecture, and people go, "Oh, that's really," but I'm doing it. So if I'm
Right.
doing it,
Right.
then they can do it. It helps. Otherwise, ventriloquists, beginners will just think about mouth movement.
Hmm.
But here, if they at their outset, if they learn that there's arm, wrist, and fingers, it'll help them conceptualize of all of the movement
Sure.
without distracting them from doing good lip sync.
Well, and also if the character is talking and like you said, he suddenly or the character whatever the character suddenly pulls back and stops talking, that moment of silence creates that contrast and opens a window
Yeah.
to comedy.
And
Um,
contrast is very important. But another thing I learned, like I learned, is when I was trained at Jim Henson Productions for like a week and a half.
oh, cool.
It was all on camera stuff. But here's
Mm,
one thing that you learn, and I found, well, does this what I learned this for work doing like TV work? Does it
Okay.
translate to the stage? It has to translate. Otherwise, I'm just spinning my wheels. I'm not teaching anybody anything that's of value. But if when the puppet is looking with Muppet style puppetry, they very rarely do profile.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of just doing this, they'll do this.
Yeah.
So the tilt of the head down with the audience side
Yeah.
comes down a bit. And the rule for Muppets is they want to see both. They want both pupils to be visible.
Wow.
And the reasoning behind that is that you've got a flat screen. Now Jim opened up this whole world that this is now that's the screen is the stage. You're not recording something in a stage. The screen is the stage. You use every part of that screen. But what this did, because the screen is flat, everything's two-dimensional. And this creates dimension rather than that.
Wow.
Two things talking to it like that. This creates, if I was to do it with my own head, it would be like that. But you can see it looks like he's talking to me now. And the tilt of the head shows that he's got interest in communicating.
Yeah.
And it's the same way when you're looking the other direction. So there's a very specific thing that I learned, at the Muppet Workshop that does translate on stage.
Well, and that what that reminds me of, that is kind of when you're in theater and they tell you to cheat out and work on your blocking as an actor, because you don't want to be, with a character, you want the audience to be able to see both of the characters and their faces interact, even though they're looking
That's
side
right.
to
It's
side.
not real life. It's
right.
It's a representation. It's an essence of a character, and it's a representation. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that I have a lot of friends who are magicians now, because a lot of magicians buy my DVDs because they want to use a puppet, and that's kind of who I made it for. I never teach ventriloquism on my DVDs. There's so many other places they can learn that.
Right.
But magicians, ventriloquists we are largely undirected entities in the theater world. And when I was a puppeteer, when I started with Carol, she was a director. And when you went up to improvise, even though you were just making it up with sweat coming out of your brow and your whole body tensing because you had to go up and do this in like 2 minutes. Wait, maybe somebody will go first and you let them do the stuff wrong.
Right.
And she starts screaming at you from behind the stage. And it wasn't repeatable.
Oh, man.
But I tell you, man, it was a learning experience that I just I was thriving in it. And she saw that, and she pulled me as I was coming down to the studio one day. She grabbed me by the shirt, and my wife was there when this happened. But she was only like 4'2". She pulls me down to her face. She goes, "You should be professional," and then pushed me into the room. And she became my advocate.
Wow.
She knew Jim Henson. She got me into the workshops. I even got to do a workshop with Jerry Nelson from one of the 5 original Muppeteers on voice work. And it's just, to have someone that, finds something in you that they think needs to be cultivated and then really just shared. It was really a blessing.
Definitely. I have a character here that I just built a few months back. He's a jackalope.
Very cool.
And the idea, I came up with him by talking with my friend Bob Rumba. And he's like, what, a character I've never seen is a jackalope puppet. Because whenever I've seen a jackalope, they either look scary or they don't look like it looks like and of course the character was created, the jackalopes were created by a taxidermist. But I created Jackie here. How are you? I'm good. Yeah, I like it here. This is fun. Yeah. Where are we? This is the tiki room. Oh, okay. Why are you wearing that shirt? Well, Steve Petra wears a lot of fun shirts on stage. Why is the other one? What is that? Okay. But I built him so he could have a lot of course, movement. And I pattern these foam bodies like we talked about foam earlier, where you can kind of crunch them in. And he enters from the middle of his back, so you can get a lot of, he can stand. Let's see if you can see this. He can stand up and talk, but then he can also sit down, and you've got a lot of,
you got a lot of range.
A lot of range, exactly. So
Great.
it's a really interesting thing. And the neat thing that I'm finding with this is I can use this character for Boy Scout shows. I can use him for, he's in my kosher shows, he's Jackie the Jewish jackalope. And and it's I'm just finding more stuff to write for with him. And it's really great. And he also works well for after shows when I do photos and stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, because he really plays. It's a great look to him.
thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been toying a lot with color and differences and character. So
Yeah, because that like people, like when we use a catchphrase, it's something that you associate with a character and how they say the catchphrase. But what you were
sure.
showing with his that range of movement that he has, that's like a catch movement. He does
Yeah,
that, and the audience responds to it.
sure.
So then they have to like, all right, can't do it too much, and
Right.
he's and then it can be funny when he does it.
Mhm.
So
That's interesting.
so
It's like a
you wouldn't have that insight if you weren't
mhm,
performing and building.
exactly. And what's interesting is that when you mention the catch movement, it kind of parallels to when you have like a tricked out hard figure. You don't want to use all of the movements too much. If you're going to use them sparingly, even
Yeah.
though no one really needs all that movement. But it's like when you have something like this, you want to use it as a callback or a reference to something. And that's truly neat. And I'm gonna take that and run with it on the whole movement aspect because that's neat for him to have his own character movement. Um, and wrapping up here, what do you hope to see from the future of ventriloquism? Or from the future of vent or puppetry as a whole?
Well, first of all, I hope I'm around to be part of it. And I like when things become broadened
Sure.
and become or and the idea of being broad is not just expansion, but it's to allow imagination to come
Hmm.
in and grow new things.
Yeah.
And I like that I don't necessarily have to have a vision for what they are, but I also enjoy my own anticipation of seeing that stuff grow.
Hmm.
I'm over 60. I started doing this in my 40s. How old are you?
I'm 19.
I'm not, when I was 19, I had already been in a couple of rock bands because I was allowed
Hmm.
to start playing in bars by the time I was 18. So I was
Oh,
been
wow.
in like, my bands when I was 15, 16, and I was in a bar band when I was 18. By 19, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to write. So I started writing music and I found people that wanted to play music that I wrote, who were
Hmm.
really actually better musicians than me. And, but I was always applying my imagination. It always goes back to that Frank Zappa thing, where I've got a working knowledge of my instrument and I've got an imagination. So I would write stuff that was challenging, that was complex, because I thought of it and I had a working knowledge of the instrument. And then it's your responsibility to refine your knowledge and working of the instrument. Like I said, going to see Jay Johnson, the lip control, the refinement of his acting, all those things are a responsibility of the artist as they go. And I can't wait to see people who are just coming into it and who are open to bring those new ideas.
Sure. Could you share a little before we go? Could you tell them a little bit about the I believe you called it Frank Oz time in the mirror?
Yeah. Well, when I'm working with a puppet, that I didn't build, like I get an
Mhm.
Axtell puppet, and again, my process not being sit at the word processor, write a script, and memorize all the jokes. I really want to play with the puppet first, and
Mhm.
I literally want to have that what I call Frank Oz time, because like I said, that that Muppet training, that Muppet book, the training, I have everything that they ever put that was backstage behind the scenes. And I obsessed with that because these people were right. They were
Mhm.
performing the textbook for what I wanted to do with my life.
Wow.
And Frank Oz, he was like just excelling,
Hmm.
and he was just given more and more opportunity to be creative with his manipulation. He
Yes.
would melt everything he could out of a character. So that to me, Frank Oz time is spending time and just devoting that time to what this puppet can do, whatever, and watching in the mirror. So I'm seeing what if that shoulder can go up. What does that look like? Does that say something, or is that just meaningless? and finding the meaning in all the little movements, what the limitations are,
Hmm.
and then what this puppet does really well that can speak to an audience. And then I'm putting together a routine, and then when you go in front of the audience, you're seeing how those things, those physical things, are working because you're aware of them because you spend so much time in that realm of the performance.
Wow. Have you researched a character and found that it does certain movements and then added that? Has that ever been
What do you mean?
something? Where you'll do research on an animal and it might give you an idea that creates a spark for a new movement that the puppet can have, or a
Yeah, that can
new.
happen. I yeah, research finds its way into every aspect. If I'm
Right.
doing something that, if it's not just a personality performance, but if it's
Hmm.
a, if it's, like the turkey thing, it was like the four stages of life of the ladybug. But as far as the movement goes, it's the same thing. That seeps into.
Wow.
If I learn something, like I had an owl puppet, and
Hmm.
owls can turn their heads 180 degrees. So that became part of the performance because the neck was loose enough that I was able to do that.
Right.
So that's just one example of doing something. That's what I like to research and find something to be funny with that. Like
Hmm.
he did a mind reading thing where he had to turn and look away, and eventually had to put a bag over his head because he kept cheating. So, but um, owls can do that.
Right.
So you find the research. There's a little, all these little details are like Velcro. I mean, Velcro can hold something that's fairly heavy, but all it is little loops and little tiny loops and little tiny hooks. And if you got enough Velcro in your routine, the character will attach to the audience.
Wow. I
So,
love that.
so details matter.
Yeah, they do. Definitely. You've made some great points. And I have two of your DVDs here. It's Let's Build a Show and Let's Get Visual. And you have a third one. Is that correct?
I have a DVD of my lecture at Van Haven in
Okay.
2013. And I have the compilation of all my teaching segments,
Mhm.
which is over an hour, and dealing with all sorts of subjects, running gag into a galloping gag. I do a thing on mobility. I'm teaching on that facts to fun concept and how to expand it into different areas with different characters. And that's called From the Petra Cave.
Wait, before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn post notifications on so you don't miss any more of these awesome interviews. And we'll see you real soon. Thanks for tuning in, guys.